Hello everyone and welcome to episode 88 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we'll be discussing putting first things first. So the inspiration for this podcast came from an absolutely fantastic quote from Layton McDonald, which I think is so applicable to so many people. I'd argue probably 90% of the people fall into this category, and hopefully this podcast will really teach you to focus on the correct things for trying to achieve your fat loss or muscle building goals, rather than getting obsessed with the minor details, which basically will mean that you'll end up just spinning your wheels and not really achieving any of your goals. So the quote goes like this: people always want advanced training programs long before they have the basics down, and they tend to be drawn to overly complicated diet plans when they don't even have the basics down. And unfortunately, this is the truth pretty much across the board within the fitness industry. People love the next best thing, the magic bullet, the minor details, talking about pre and post workout nutrition or supplements, etc., and they actually forget the bigger, broader, possibly unsexy principles that must be in place for you to achieve your fat loss and muscle building goals. Now, it's not to say that some of these minor details don't have their place, for example, pre and post workout nutrition, supplements, etc., but it must come underneath this umbrella of these bigger, broader principles that you need to be focusing on first. Otherwise, you're never going to be achieving your fat loss and muscle building goals. So in this podcast, I'm really going to be going back to basics, going back to exactly what you should be focusing on with regards to your fat loss or muscle building goals. Now, the reason why this is critical is, in short, if you focus on implementing some of these minor details to perfection, to absolute perfection, yet you don't have these key principles in place, you're not going to achieve your goals. Whereas if you actually focus on implementing these bigger, broader principles and you don't even get some of these minor details right, you're still going to achieve great progress. So that should hopefully put these minor details into context versus these bigger, broader, fundamental principles. So here's some big, broad principles for fat loss. Sufficient protein, absolutely critical. Within a fat loss phase, we have two main goals. One is to obviously lose body fat, and the second main goal is to maintain as much muscle mass as possible. So hence why sufficient protein is critical to help to preserve lean muscle mass within the fat loss phase. Second big principle: energy deficit. We must be burning more calories than we're consuming. This is the number one principle of fat loss. So many people ignore this. They're focusing on eating healthy foods, eating what they consider good foods in isolation, but if you're not creating the energy deficit needed for fat loss, you're not going to lose body fat regardless of how good you consider the meals you're eating. And this is such a big principle I want to impress upon you within this podcast. And the next big principle is having weight training as the foundation of your routine within the fat loss phase. Remember, second thing to focus on in the fat loss phase is maintaining lean muscle mass. So having the weight training as the foundation will help to preserve lean muscle mass within the fat loss phase. Therefore, the weight you do lose will mainly be body fat, water and glycogen, as opposed to losing a lot of muscle mass. Next big principle is measuring your progress and then making changes to either calories and or cardio to continue creating that energy deficit need for fat loss. In my opinion, this is where the majority of people can go wrong. They have a false assumption that the calories and macronutrients they start on will be the same calories and macronutrients they will need at the end of the fat loss phase. It's an ever-changing process. Subject to your progress, you need to make changes when necessary. Fat loss plateaus are all parts of the process. So if you're not measuring your progress, you don't know whether you've actually met a plateau. And if you don't know whether you've met a plateau, you don't know whether to make a change or not. So this is really critical, being able to measure your progress and then either drop calories and or increase expenditure from cardio to continue creating an energy deficit need for fat loss. Now, with regards to muscle growth, some big broad principles that must be in place. Again, sufficient protein, key principle must be in place. Additionally, energy surplus is, again, to quote Layton McDonald again, you can't build muscle out of thin air and wishful thinking. You must have a surplus of calories, i.e. you must be eating more than you're actually burning. Next big principle is a program focused around progressive overload, actually increasing volume over time. Most people, unfortunately, they're not tracking their weights within the gym, they're not tracking their previous sessions, so they can't objectively gauge whether they're actually increasing volume and strength over time or not, and that is the big fundamental principle with regards to your training within a muscle building phase. And then another big principle is focusing on increasing calories if you meet a muscle building plateau. So within the muscle building phase, you need to be focusing on a rate of weight gain suitable to your training age. So quite obviously, the more advanced you are, the more weight training experience you have, the more difficult building muscle becomes. So if you're an absolute beginner, someone with less than 6 months weight training experience, focusing on a 1 to 3 pound per month gain is a great place to start. Intermediate, someone with 6 months to 2 years weight training experience, focusing on a 1 to 2 pound gain. And if you're advanced, you're beyond 2 years weight training experience, you're really focusing on gym performance, increasing strength and volume over time, eating enough to recover from your sessions to make those strength and volume gains. So you're not actively looking to really increase the scale weight on a monthly basis. Obviously the weight will still fluctuate, but you're not really setting a target. You're more thinking about gym performance, eating enough to recover from to make those strength and volume gains, but not actively looking to increase the scale weight. So the reason why I brought up these big principles is most people aren't tracking this, most people aren't doing this, most people aren't having sufficient protein or creating an energy deficit because they're not actually measuring their progress to know whether they're actually losing body fat or not. So really make sure that you're actually putting these broader principles in first. As soon as you have these big broad principles in, then you can start focusing on supplementation and some pre and post workout nutrition and other strategies. But you must have these in place first, because without these principles in place, you're not going to achieve your fat loss or muscle building goals. That's the harsh truth. So it really is critical to, as the name of the podcast suggests, put first things first, and then you can focus on some of the slightly less important but still important principles, but they need to be implemented alongside these big broad principles. So hopefully you found this useful, hopefully you've enjoyed that. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page. You can download my free ebook immediately. I'll look forward to speaking to you next week. Thank you very much. Take care.